So we're going to talk about making room or making time to move, which is a topic that is not obvious but critically important as we go into the post-pandemic workplace. My name is Phil Kirschner. I'm a senior expert in our McKinsey's both real estate and people and organizational performance practices. I am a workplace strategist by training, which means I think about the role that the physical spaces have in the pursuit of our business objectives. It has been a really wild 18-ish months to have the thing I think about professionally become everybody's dinner conversation about sort of do we, don't we when it comes to the office, but I'm really excited to be here and to share some insights with you. We want this to be a very interactive session for the next hour, so please raise your hand, shout, ask questions throughout as we go, and I'll turn it to Jenny to introduce herself and start.
Hi everyone. Oh, mine's working too. Awesome. I'm Jenny. I'm an associate partner in the McKinsey Boston office, and I spent the last decade thinking about how to help state and local governments operate more efficiently, and I focus a lot on workforce topics. I started my career in Maryland contingent over there. I was in Prince George's County for the first 5 years of my career, so very dear to my heart. But I've been with McKinsey since then, and I'm excited to be here. I'm responsible for pushing the buttons on the presentation, so I don't think I'm going to mess it up, but if I don't, and then a round of applause at the end would be nice. I can walk through what we're planning to talk about, and then we'll do the talking about it, and then I think Phil's right that we're tired of hearing each other talk, so we would love to have this be much more interactive than just us chatting. So we wanted to talk about a couple of things. The first is that we think hybrid is here to stay, which is a little obvious, so we'll go through that pretty quickly. But then a lot of the stuff that McKinsey's been researching recently about workforce in the hybrid world is about purpose. And we want to talk a bit about that and what that means in terms of how to make a better workplace for state and local employees. There's a little bit of a caveat here about the thrust of the talk. Like, when we think about the state workforce, there's a lot of people who are not going to be hybrid. So when we do this with corporations, it's a little different than, you have tons of employees who are going to be out in the field every day, and this is a little bit more focused on the back office stuff. So we'll talk about what that means and purpose and values, and then Phil's going to talk a lot about something that's near and dear to his heart, which is that he's tired of me putting meetings on his calendar and how to make that stop happening. And making the most of people's time and what that means and how you can do it. And then we'll have a discussion. I messed it up. Okay. Quick poll, and I read this wrong, but apparently what it's meant to say is who in the room thinks that next year, at least every day, you'll have at least one person who's working remotely? Okay. So, great. The other way to read it is, do you think you'll have at least one person who will be working remotely the entire time, which also maybe is true. So obviously this is, I think, a thing that's here to stay. 52% of employees that we survey would prefer a more flexible working model post-pandemic. I'm not actually sure who the other 48% are who are like, no, I want my workforce to be less flexible and I want to have to be at work. But I think the 30% of employees saying that they're likely to switch jobs if we return to fully on-site work is really eye-opening. That's a big percentage of the workforce that's essentially saying, I don't want to stay if I'm stuck going into the office every day. And people really do want this flexibility of having 3 or more days a week where they can stay home. So that is important when we think about how we make working from home part of the time be productive. I think a lot of people this year have experienced burnout. I mean, personally, I've had this problem, and I'm not quite sure how to fix it, so I feel like I shouldn't lecture about it, but burnout is very real, and one of the pieces of research that we've done is that people who are most affected by some of these issues, whether it's doing remote work or wanting to come back to the office and the impact that has on mental health, are the populations who are most impacted by, or who we want to have benefit from workforce policies. So people with children, or Black African American employees, people experiencing mental health issues. So these issues that we're all having around burnout are just impacting the parts of the population that we think are most vulnerable even more. You should feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I would do it.
Missing anything? Okay. So we have done some research about what this looks like in terms of retention. And people, we have this article McKinsey does called like the great
attrition or the great attraction.
The great attrition or the great attraction. Like, what is this? And part of the research that we did on that is looking at the difference between what employers think matters from the perspective of retention and what employees say matters. And they're just like kind of not the same. So employers tend to focus on, there's this graph that we show that's too small to put up on the slide, so I'm going to try to describe it. But employers are on one side and employees are on the other. And the employers are really focused on stuff like pay, career development, physical spaces, like actually having to come into the office or not, as those being like the key drivers of retention and why people decide to stay or leave. And the employees, pretty much across the board, rank things like feeling valued by their manager, feeling purpose in their work, having supportive teams and colleagues, feeling like you can be yourself, and it's like they're not talking to each other at all. Like the employers are off in one corner thinking one thing and employees are thinking something else. Which is important, I think, for employers to know as you think about how you make it the great attraction and not the great attrition.
Yeah, some of the sort of frightening statistics behind this report is that roughly sort of 40% of the workforce now will say that they are kind of actively considering leaving and waiting for this moment of decision. Like, what is going, everyone understands, like, we haven't fully returned to the office yet. Delta's been really challenging. But they're like, at some point, my employer is going to make a decision and tell me. And if at that moment it does not align with what I'm after in life, both from a flexibility perspective and purpose and kind of authenticity and belonging, I'll go. But that's with 40% of people who actively will acknowledge I have kind of my eye somewhere else, there's this other 60% of perfectly happy employees who, because of this gap, may find themselves like in a period of disagreement. Sort of like this cliff of additional attrition risk, which is really terrifying. I think especially where if what mobility is people want, there's been an explosion of jobs with absolute clarity over, yes, you may have flexibility, you could be fully remote if you want, that's available to you in your state and other states, and because it's so easy to switch, that's a huge risk that we're all kind of carrying going into the return period.
Okay, so just pausing, any questions so far on what we've covered? I had one originally, which was what is purpose? Like, what does that mean? But yeah, just anything that we've said so far.
Coffee still sinking in?
I think we've just been really clear.
Well, yeah.
Just, okay. So what does this look like in terms of numbers? 60% of employees we surveyed said COVID-19 had caused them to reflect on their purpose in life. 50% of employees said they are reconsidering the kind of work they do because of the pandemic. And I have threatened to quit my job 3 times more than Phil has in the last 24 hours. So, impacting millennials, impacting basically everybody. And what's interesting, I think, about all this purpose stuff is like, especially from a firm, like, I'm on the millennial end of people who work at McKinsey, and it's interesting to see my firm doing all this research on purpose, because you end up with all of these like fairly senior people who are like all of a sudden very touchy-feely about like their emotions and like purpose, and it's getting to be this like big thing in the company. But I think that's like exactly what the research is telling them and us that we're supposed to be doing, is like making more time and space to like be people with each other. And like, I've noticed it at our firm, like I get calls more often now from senior people at the firm who are like, hey, how are you? Are you okay? And I think we're taking this like very seriously, because there is this risk that people are gonna feel like they're not connected to the work they're doing and wanna leave.
Yeah, we all sort of know what that feels like now. Like colleagues might have known I was a parent before. Now they have seen my children, like multiple times, sometimes in costume. And like, we can't go back from that. Microsoft actually had this, terrifying statistic, but said that over like thousands of people they had surveyed, something like 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 employees at the early part of the pandemic had cried in front of a coworker. Like, which is not an optimal situation, but like, we all are seeing the humanity in each other in a very different way, which I think has opened people's eyes to purpose. And then coming back a little bit just to the real estate of it all from my perspective, COVID is also showing a lot of companies something that maybe that they knew before intuitively, but never wanted to ask for fear of knowing the answer, which is that like most of our offices weren't that great. So I just saw a lot of which is a fact, private, public sector. Facilities managers, most that I know, never wanted to ask because if they had the answer, they couldn't do anything about it, so they never asked. But now they know because the quality of the office is on the long list of things that people put into like why I don't want to come back. Like it's not so great anyway. I'm not going to go to an office that I didn't love to then continue to sit on Zoom with all of my colleagues all day long. That doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to stay here instead of doing it. So it's all very much connected.
Okay, and yeah, feel free to stop us if you have questions about anything. But charging on, there is, not surprisingly, when we talk about purpose, a huge difference between how people in executive and upper management positions feel about purpose. So the graph on the left is showing that 85% of executives and management agree that they can live their purpose in their day-to-day work. And then you get like basically the opposite of that with frontline employees and frontline managers. And there's a lot of reasons why this is true. Like there's I think an easy gimme example, which is that somebody who's working in a frontline job might not feel as connected to the purpose of the company or like doesn't feel as valued because they're maybe paid less and like that sure, but actually the people who do this work look into the data on that causal stuff, and actually it's really related to like how often the frontline employees are asked to think about purpose or even given the chance to think about purpose. It's like 7 or 8 times more likely that a person who's asked like, do you feel, how are you? Like, do you feel like you're contributing? Feels more like their purpose is aligned with their organization than people who aren't asked. So it kind of, you look at this originally, and one of my thoughts was like, gosh, like this is a broader problem with like our economy, and like how could we ever fix this as employers? But there is actually stuff you can do to make people feel like their purpose is being fulfilled at work. And we're kind of getting to like the big aha of
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Just to add one point on that, it's also like connecting the sort of higher order purpose that we want with the realities of this hybrid situation. Also, when you ask people, so was that a question?
Yeah.
Or a question or a stretch?
So, yeah. So I'm.
Do we need to have him on a mic for?
Now this is what, the second, third discussion we've had about working remotely. First, let's just go to this slide, purpose gap. Wouldn't it be much easier to instill purpose through casual conversations and interactions that happen from being in the office rather than working remotely?
Yes, and. So just make sure I understand the question, because we were doing, you're sort of asking like, is it better to force a return because of the conversations and activities that take place in the office that will accelerate this, like the purpose and belonging? Is that?
Yes, in a nutshell. It might just go to culture. I think it's the same thing. It's, I think a lot of those, what's the feeling of the office, what is the overarching culture, you get through informal interactions rather than you're on a Zoom meeting for 30 minutes.
Yes. This is an excellent gateway to the rest of this conversation. So a couple points. So the first thing I was going to say was just on this. If you ask someone sort of how is your current workplace, being your house for most of us for the last 18 months, enable you to do your job well, like enable you to work productively, some kind of question like that. The answers to that question during the pandemic, one, have been a lot higher for most individual workers, like the percentage, like 10, 15, 20% higher than they would have answered when they were in the office by themselves. But the more senior you are, which is usually a proxy for like the more well-off and successful you are, the higher your perception of ability to do your work at home is. Not surprisingly, because most of the sort of leaders, the bosses, have a nice house with a big private office that can shut the door with a nice desk and a nice chair. Whereas the younger you are, the earlier you are in your career, the more likely you are to be sitting at a dining room table, like fighting for space with a roommate. so it's sort of obvious, but it's important that, like, again, in this purpose gap, like, leaders, broadly speaking, have been feeling better throughout the whole pandemic than the frontline workers, the people on the ground, the younger staff, who don't have that same level of resourcing. It's not too dissimilar. You know, most CEOs of most companies quite happily, surrounded by support staff, can be running billion-dollar organizations like from a BlackBerry on a plane, whereas like the lower down the organization you go, the harder it is. Getting to the point about the office. So in those same kinds of surveys, not surprisingly, the home is really good for like me stuff. Better than the office. I am distracted less. I can control my environment. I can control the temperature. There are fewer barriers to my workday. I don't have to go to the meeting room. I don't have to fight for the meeting room. And most people's individual complaints with the office before were around that like focus issue. But being together absolutely is better for like the we stuff, for higher order conversations, mentoring, learning, informal social interactions, like cultural cohesion. Definitely works better when we're together. It does not necessarily mean like in the office as we thought about it before, and many offices were lousy at fostering that kind of a culture because it was like a cubicle farm, or it's really hard to like have fun while someone else is trying to focus. But yes, 100%, and one of the things that we're going to go into now, Jenny, we can green button, but like how to get hybrid right is to talk a little bit. Please.
I just wanted to make a comment
Yes.
on Kate's comment. So one of the things that I did when we started to talk telework, I can talk about it.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not for us, it's for the
That's
people.
okay. One of the things that I started to talk to the executives above me about when we started to look at our telework plans was the why. And I kept asking why. Why do we have to come in the office? Because of the culture. Okay, we have a great culture, and we've continued that great culture. So, why? And what I implemented was, instead of coming into the office, what we do one day a month, we go and see one of our customers. So we might do a tour of the State Museum together, and then in the afternoon we'll have a bureau meeting, we'll do lunch. We still get the together time, but we're also getting to see our purpose because we're understanding our customers. Our folks, like my folks do leases, they do contracts, but they don't see the result of that, which is the citizen who needs to go to the county assistant's office to collect their welfare benefits. They don't see any of that unless I go show them. And so I took advantage of this to show my staff the purpose through going to visit versus coming together and talking. And that seemed to work better, and also kept us continuing to be close.
Yeah,
So
that's a fantastic example. Recent example just on the extreme, and I'm not suggesting that this is for anybody in this room, but if you were paying attention a week ago, there's a company called GitLab, G-I-T-L-A-B, that went public. They are the world's probably most famous fully remote company. They have like 1,800 employees in 100 countries, have never had a single office once, ever, and just went public at like an $11 billion valuation, something crazy. A company like that, pre-COVID times, they actually had an employee policy, which is public, which is amazing, where it's just like, if you figure out that you live near another one of our colleagues, for whatever fluke reason that you just happen to distribute it around the world, you are welcome to go visit them, to like have lunch. We will pay for some of it, not all, but some of it. Like, we encourage you to do it. And they have these amazing stories of people who work that system to like bop around the world visiting colleagues. So like it's even better to say, let's go visit the customer, so to speak, but like that's exactly the point. Like the moments that matter, being together, we like being together. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the office. And the critical problem that we're gonna get into is to getting it right involves taking a really hard look at the thing that is ruining all of our schedules, which is meetings. So let's talk about getting hybrid right. We skipped one. There we go. So just make the point. We're at like a once in 100-year inflection point to change the way we do everything. It's a significant opportunity to rethink sort of productivity, however that is defined for your organization, how the work actually gets done, by whom, in what order, like when and where. The culture of our organizations, and Jenny made a great point to me before, reminding me that like public service institutions, government agencies, you have something that like, what did you say, the company that makes,
I think I said toilet paper, but it's a little unfair.
Like, you have purpose.
I mean, toilet paper had a lot of purpose too.
Yeah.
So
You have something that the private sector doesn't. Access to talent, I was working with a state agency last year, just like the fact that they realized they could hire people all of a sudden away from the state capital was like a mind-blowing realization. And then efficiency, just like cost of real estate, cost of anything. This is the chance, not just to think about the return, but how do we take everything we've learned during COVID to make a real step change in how things are done. And like we were browsing around on the Post-its at some of these examples of rethinking the experience for employees, for whoever your quote-unquote customer is. This is that chance. But to do the really good stuff does involve rethinking how the work gets done, and this is the point we'll dig into a little bit now.
Yeah, really. Can I quick poll, just point of personal interest? Has anybody already started like recruiting differently or like finding talent in a different way because of remote? Like you're getting it from somewhere else, so that's already happening. I was wondering if that was going to be like once we figured out what we were doing on return, or if it's already. It doesn't look like everyone. I saw like 3 or 4 hands.
Well, it is happening in my state, for example, in Maryland. But one of the constraints is that we have an HR policy, statewide HR policy, for example, that says that the first 6 months that an employee is hired, they have to be on probation, and so we cannot bring them in to offer them hybrid or any kind of teleworking for the first 6 months. And I heard JR talking about that earlier, how in Arizona, he's able to hire people from 100 miles away and it expands his talent pool. I mean, that's really a tough restraint that we have on us, and I see it in our managers all the time, saying, you know, we've got some great talent out there, but because of this state policy, we can't, you know, take advantage of it. So I guess that's one of the issues we'll have to deal with from a state level, and that's more of above my pay grade
But
challenge.
hopefully that bubbles up. I mean, it is audiences like this that hopefully like help you make that.
Well, I'm hoping that the state DBM, Department of Budget Management Director, will come to one of your conferences maybe and learn something. But I do think that is what he said, when I heard him say that, that's one of the reasons I love coming to conferences like this. You see what other folks are doing. That's been, I mean, I've got one employee, for example, that works in my division. I'm in Baltimore, and she lives in Virginia. And she comes up like twice a week. She's one of my most productive employees, but if I had to hire her now, she wouldn't do it because she has to be up every day. So that's one of the things we got to deal with at HR. I'll give it to HR people.
Oh, I'm so not HR. I just masquerade as one. I work with a bunch of them. So, is this on?
Yeah,
Here we go. So in Oregon, we've shifted our recruiting model as well. Actually, it kind of shifted us because when we all went remote, our folks just scattered to the wind. So we've got employees in 43 different states, and we're just now kind of catching up to that reality. And so there's a lot of work around, like I mentioned before, the payroll and the risk and the, you know, the regulatory bits, but we're also embracing that to be like, hey, this is still working. So we're in the process of changing our statewide policies around HR and liability and all that. So it's been a game changer for us.
I cannot imagine, like, to be honest, I do not specialize in state government the way that Jenny does, but like, if every state overnight was just like, yeah, you can work in any state, that would cause quite a thing.
It's chaos in Oregon right now.
I mean, for one,
it's
much less
chaos,
for
I'm not gonna lie. But we're slowly figuring it out, and we're actually using that strategy in our current recruitments right now. So yeah, it's been great.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I know a lot of, I know 2 young lawyers who are tired of working in big law in New York are from Oregon. So I feel like if you can find them and get them to come back, like work remotely, like they don't want to go back, but I think that happens. Like people are really excited about state. I mean, a lot of my friends are really jealous of like, you get to work with states are so cool. And it's like, yeah, they're really cool actually. And you should work for them also, but you don't have to live in, God bless them, Albany. You know, you can live in New York if you want to. Okay, sorry. I feel like we're in Rochester, so I can't, you know, it feels like maybe a place that wouldn't like Albany. Does Rochester like Albany?
When you're like, in times of stress, unfortunately, we tend to like buckle down and focus on the task at hand and lose the good stuff. And both, like culturally, as we've been talking about, managers and employees who are scattered and just trying to like keep the house up are less likely to make time for the mentorship and the cultural cohesion and social interaction. But also, as I keep coming back to like the normal office survey stuff, being apart isn't as good as being together for those kinds of activities. So we sort of get hit twice with that problem. So that brings us to a weird, we'll go
Should we
back
go
one
here?
more. Yeah, it was like, just this point, which is really weird for someone like me who spends most of my time talking to corporate real estate and facilities types who are obsessed about like the space, the thing we can like knock on and go, do I go back to that thing 1 day or 2 days or 3 days or whatever, doing all the math and the simulations of what everyone shows up, but we're focusing too much on the supply of space and not enough on like the demand for the space. And the reasons that we want spaces most of the time have to do with when we want to get together. And if we don't create enough time, we can't physically do it. Now we'll get into the big, the banner question on the M word that we want to talk about for a little bit. So straw poll, and I'll ask a few sort of versions of this, like, I think I know the answer to this one. Whose weeks are consumed by entirely too many meetings now? Probably more than you had with COVID, pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID.
More than pre-COVID? Now has it gotten worse? Yeah, lots, okay, gotten worse. Because largely we were all still operating as if we were together. So, my 5 minutes of tapping Jenny on the shoulder before is now 30 minutes for some reason that I will schedule her for all that time, which makes absolutely no sense. I'm just curious, like, anyone who wants to hazard a guess or look at your phone, let's say 2 weeks out, what percentage of your sort of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5-ish schedule is like recurring meetings? Like,
80.
a big,
80.
yeah, I mean, big numbers. And they tend to break down, when I've done this exercise with the state agencies actually, I usually ask like, how many hours a week do you spend in meetings? First, like one-on-one, someone probably who works for you or you work for them. Then you're like small team, whatever that means to you. Maybe the like broader department and then like broader agency. And it's usually that like the small team and the one-on-one, which is a shockingly high number. And we got to work on that, frankly, to solve some of the purpose and belonging problems. So, has anyone heard the term like asynchronous communication batted around in the last 18? Question.
So, y'all look at John.
Whoop.
Hello.
I hear you.
I can hear
As y'all look at meetings,
There we go.
There we go. As y'all look at meetings, one of the things that strikes me about Zoom is like you can just do back to back to back. And when you got physical meetings, it's like I'm on the first floor, then I'm on the fifth floor, then I'm on the third floor. Somewhere in there, I got to get a drink of water and go to the bathroom. TMI. When we're on Zoom meetings, I can do all that while y'all are online.
Yeah.
And so you end up with like.
Yeah. Look. And even if that's a lie, if you were saying like you haven't done that.
That's back to back to back. We're
Yeah.
used to physically, you wouldn't let someone schedule you at a 9 o'clock and a 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock and a 12 o'clock. You would just go, no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And now
No, I know.
do.
It's abusive. It's completely abusive.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I've seen people like out and about, like at a cafe, say, "Hold on, I have to like sort of join a Zoom meeting." Like from their phone for fake presence, just be like, I don't really have to be there, but I have to like be there. It's ridiculous. Does the term asynchronous communication like sound familiar to anyone? It's been, yeah, good. Back. This was always a thing before. Asynchronous communication just means like talk to each other, not in real time. So email. This is not new. But if you are the GitLabs of the world, like the more remote and flexible forward that you are, to give people freedom to do their individual work, largely at a time or place of their choosing, they have to be able to do that not in real time. And we've talked a lot about like getting together for the moments that matter, and frankly, most meetings aren't moments that matter. We don't like them, they're not effective, they abuse our schedule. They could probably, you'll hear the phrase like, oh, that could have been an email. But now there's much more advanced ways of thinking about that problem. But just to start with this little like pyramid, from the bottom up, showing like the kinds of activities that are easiest to switch away from real time have to be together, which could be in person or remote or a mix, just like happening all together at the same time. The bottom two, largely the bottom one of like that one directional, team meeting where the boss is basically running through a list of stuff to get it out of their mind or asking for a one-way feed of information to get updates. That does not have, it did not before COVID. mind you, have to be done in real time, but we've always just sort of done it because it's easier to conduct it in a meeting than it is to sort of write all that out in advance. But I'm kind of curious, show of hands or anyone wants to volunteer, like of the impressive number of meetings that you have in your average week recurring, is it safe to assume that a reasonable percentage of them are in the sort of bottom of the pyramid, or not? No? Maybe?
No, I think maybe I'm very fortunate.
That is fantastic.
I feel like most of my meetings are productive, and most of my meetings are productive. I don't know if that's because we always make sure we know in advance what we're going to talk about. We have innovating and problem solving we need to do and decisions that need to be made. I only occasionally have a meeting where I sit there and think, why am I here?
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I'm curious to know, this problem typically gets worse the further down you go, a little bit.
True.
Anyone else can share? Or like, I'm curious, I mean, just with the anecdotally, someone who wants to share the meeting that you know you wish wasn't a meeting, or the one that you're just like isn't as effective as you want. You had a similar comment, or the
I'm not going to answer that question, but what I will say is I'm finding, so one is I decline meetings, and I'm pretty disciplined about my calendar, which upsets a lot of people. It frustrates a lot of people. If I don't know what the purpose is and you don't have an agenda, we're not having the meeting. And so I think it forces, I hope, for folks to be more thoughtful and for us to spend our time in a more meaningful way. What I'm finding is throughout the organization, I think because colleagues aren't connecting as much, they are having more meetings, and because it's easier to do a quick Zoom and a quick WebEx and a this and a that, as opposed to in the other days you have to walk here or go there and schedule a conference room, because they aren't connecting as meaningfully on the actual work or that higher order thinking, they're doing more ticky-tacky firefighting. And so when I'm getting into meetings, I need to be there, but we're doing a lot more trying to figure out like what happened, what went wrong, as opposed to spending time thinking about how can we be innovating, how can we be thinking ahead, is a lot more like, how did that happen, how do we fix it? And for me, it's a lot around, at least my observation has been, it's really been around folks just not connecting, keeping their head down, whether it's at home or in the workplace, in the traditional workplace, and then just things are just going off the rails.
Yeah, that's great. And like the interesting dynamic with this is like we're all sort of imagining the current state where most of us are still remote most of the time. As we come out of the pandemic and enter what we've all agreed is like a forcibly hybrid period where people will not always be where you think they are necessarily in the same volumes. Having to replicate what we're doing today in the mixed hybrid fashion is harder and puts a greater premium on like what are the things that we can take off the plate so that the times we do come together where we may have mixed participation, we have better time to plan what we're going to talk about, who's going to be there, what it's going to feel like, because you can't be a good host and a good facilitator 40 times in a row when you're back-to-back schedule, like with no breaks at all.
I think it'd be helpful to hear, like, would somebody who thinks it has gotten worse during COVID and has not been able to fix it be willing to talk about like why, or what it is that they think is making it worse and why it can't get better? I feel like I shouldn't pick on you, even though you told us that it's really bad for you, but.
Because bathroom breaks are important.
Yes, exactly.
Well, they're not bad meetings. They're not bad meetings necessarily. It's just there's a lot more of them. And I think, to your point, I think some of it is people have meetings just because they haven't seen anybody all day.
Yeah.
And I think it's not that I don't mind the meetings I'm in, other than just the timing of it of like, golly, I just want to go get a drink. I want to go get a snack. I want to run to the restroom. Give me 10 minutes. And that's it's like we ought to schedule meetings for 50 minutes instead of 60 minutes or 20 minutes instead of 30. And I think that solves half my problem.
Yeah. Excellent. So let's go ahead there. We'll keep that for another 25 minutes. So what's different now is that there's a couple of new tools. Some are new, some are gaining popularity because of all of our organizations are sort of forcibly looking for solutions to some of these problems, or maybe are more open to thinking about different kinds of technologies to help us collaborate differently. And they tend to break down into 4 categories for me. The first is the ability to do that over there digitally. probably the #1 complaint I've heard anyone like, we have to be together because like, what am I gonna do with all my Post-its? Especially technology teams, like we can't move because of our Post-its. Even before COVID, the explosion in like agile development methodologies and even software, like card carrying computer science major, so big nerd. But it was always like, as sophisticated as the work is, it was like, gotta see my Post-its. The tools have been there. There are two in particular that have gotten very popular during COVID. If you have tested any of them, the two mainstream ones are called Miro and Mural. They do basically the same thing. Microsoft has a version, Google has a version, there's lots of them. But the idea is like, you can do that digitally now. It takes a little bit more thought and a little bit more preparation, but it is fantastically powerful actually to be able to, even if a few people are sort of, let's just call it brainstorming, fast and furious. I should say actually, one of the best things about these tools is that they're all very template oriented. So once you sort of figure out like a flow, like, hey, this is great for retrospectives or for brainstorming, or even just for like icebreakers, they've all got like click, click, boom, icebreaker game with instructions, you can read it. But once you've done that, you can actually, even weeks later, someone new joins, be like, hey, we had this amazing session like 3 months ago. Go take a look. Like we'd actually love, you could go and pile on now. It's still there. So that's really a game changer for, not just in real time, but to give people a creative outlet for doing something asynchronously. The second is sort of the category of work process visualization, and this can be done a lot, but most of the reason that most managers would have not given someone flexibility before is the statement that like, if I don't see you, you're not working. And people like me know from countless hours of quite literally walking around with clipboards sometimes, most employees like weren't in front of their managers before as much as they maybe thought. But any stress around like, I have to be talking to people and having these meetings because I don't know what's happening, is a failure to think about how can you make it easy to know what's going on, how the water is moving through the pipe at any time when you're not sitting in front of someone. And again, the Post-it loving like agile development teams are very good at this. Whether it's like, Trello, Asana, all these sort of Post-it and board oriented tools. Again, Microsoft has them, Google has them, there's dozens of them. Just forcing people to like go to one place to visualize the work. And the other amazing thing with those tools where you're using them to their fullest is that the conversation about the work also happens kind of with the Post-its and with the cards as they move along, which keeps things out of your email, which is an amazing, life-changing experience. But it is, any even small team who has never thought about this, it's like a bit of hand-to-hand combat, but to say, think about it. Like, what could you do if we blindfolded you and tied your hands behind your back for life? How would you know how things are going in your team and like talk to your team members about it, because it is a stress reliever for you, it's a stress reliever for them, and frankly is a sort of gateway for all other forms of process improvement and experience and automation and all the cool stuff like down the line. It's just making it easier to know how things are going without having to ask. The third is the channel-based communication platform. So for most of you, I'm hazarding a guess, is Microsoft Teams. For some of the crazier ones, might be Slack. Or both. The challenge with a lot of these tools is that they tend to be abused as like instant messaging or text replacements instead of in the threaded format that they were actually designed to do. It drives me bananas when someone asks like a very good question in, for us, Slack, but it would be exactly the same thing in Teams, and then the person who wants to respond to the question like writes a new message instead of responding to bury all that stuff in a thread.
I'm finding this out in real time. I do this to him all the time.
Oh, it's like, it drives me nuts.
I'm really sorry.
I wish I could like drag things in, but we have all the tools. This isn't a question of installing something new. I have been shocked at the number of like technical support staff who are deploying Office 365 in both private and public institutions who don't know little tricks even around Teams with subject lines and threaded responses. They're just using it the way everybody else is. And without, it's not about having the tool, it's how you use it. And again, if you look at the GitLabs and the really flex forward companies, they are incredibly specific about how and when certain tools are used. And that extends to like urgency. What tool will I use when something has really hit the fan and I need your attention like right now? And that answer shouldn't be I send you a Slack or an email or something. It should feel different, out of band. Like the one and only time a month, if that, you will hear from me by phone without any warning is like when it's legitimately urgent, which then sends the message that you can carry on and like communicate via Teams or Slack or whatever at a time and place of your choosing, because those conversations are not meant to be real-time responses. It's how we do everything. And then the last one, my favorite, is the category of like rich but asynchronous communications. So many of the reasons I find people schedule meetings, and we are super guilty of this. McKinsey has like a terrible culture of let's just get on the phone and hash that out. With our own like language, and my colleagues are smiling because we know, like, let's get on the phone and later on today and we'll talk about it in real time. Many of the reasons that we do that is because the thing we want to say is complicated. Maybe not long-winded or like complex, but like I have a thought about a slide or about a client, and it is just much easier for me to know that in 5 hours I will get you in real time and I can say it out loud with all of my inflections and questions, and you can see me moving and like, am I sure, am I not? Instead of writing an email that will take me 20 minutes to perfect, or making a slide basically to show you all of the things that I want to talk about. So there's been this explosion of asynchronous voice and video tools, which is not new. Again, the idea of like recording your screen wasn't new, but the speed at which some of these new ones work, the big ones are Loom and Yak probably, but also like Slack is getting into this game and Teams is getting into this game. Of being able to just like hit a button, maybe your video comes on, but you could just start talking and say, hey, see this slide, see that thing, I've got a question about that, or maybe it could be done this different way. You hear that I'm not sure, and then like send, link. And maybe it goes to one person, maybe it goes into a channel. So not just one person, but everybody can hear that thing at a time of their choosing and respond, maybe even with a similar message. So even the like 5-minute check-in, or not a 1-minute check-in, just like, hey, that thing you did with the client today or in that meeting, like, that was awesome, hang up. Like if Jenny got that message, seeing me do it, it's actually more meaningful than like a text, I think. But they become so easy to do that they're really like meeting killers, personally. I think we will see a lot more of this. Because also it helps with like town halls. Instead of the 1-hour town hall where the agency secretary or maybe someone like talks for 30 minutes and then takes questions. The first part of the conversation can be like, oh, I've recorded myself giving like my little update. You all have a week to listen to it, and then let's come together for a full hour of Q&A or something more interactive. But like I've just taken the one-way part out. You don't have to do that. You don't have to wait when maybe you can't attend in person. So like these are all out there. And I think really revolutionizing how we think about especially the bottom of the pyramid. Questions on this? So 1 or 2 people writing. It's good.
Is anybody using the asynchronous one? Out of curiosity, is this made it?
Yeah, or like the voice or video.
I have not seen a state do this really, so I'm just curious if anyone. Okay.
No, we're not using, I'm fascinated about it, because I'm known for like making these long rambling voice notes. Do exactly what you said.
Yeah, voice notes are great. Like,
Long rambling voice. But so yeah, are y'all gonna send like the names of those? I know you mentioned them.
yeah, Lumia. Yeah, just imagine like voicemails in channels with context.
Yeah.
That's where other people could see them later, especially to share with like a wider team. You just, like, hey, I just had this amazing thought about this thing. I want the whole team to hear my thought. Let's talk about it like later, or respond here with your thoughts or something.
By the way,
amazing.
if people have kids, you might see them doing this in WhatsApp. Like this is a big thing with like Gen Z kids doing it. Like they send like voice messages to each other. My nieces do that. I think it's very weird, but it actually really helps, I think, in our work content.
And for I see companies using it like for training. Again, if someone like explains a process once, you're like, oh, that's amazing. I'm going to post that in the place, which explains how we do stuff. Which actually is like it's something that's sort of the combination of all these things. Again, if you go to the GitLabs or so, they'll tell you that like documentation culture generally is the big unlock for flexibility. And they do something really interesting. This whole category of what they call forcing functions. So GitLab, again, just use them as an example. forcibly expunges all their Slack messages after 90 days. And like some states may do that for retention reasons. They do it to make sure that you can't assume that if you've put something out into Slack, that it's like a real thing, that it has persistence. So they are big into handbooks. There should be a place you can go to learn all of the stuff about all of the teams and all of the protocols and all of the tools and all of the everything in one place across, like, just because you're in like agency A does not mean you should not be able to kind of figure out how agency B ticks and measures their work and does all that stuff. And making sure that it's not hidden in the chats, but is written down, because that allows like flexibility. It's easier for people coming in and out of the organization faster. It's more inclusive of those folks who are not in the room where that happened. It's a lot of work to write stuff down, but it is the gateway for all of this. So I think knowledge managers, content managers is going to be a big focus going forward to enable this kind of flex and purpose. So that brings us, so quickly, some of you have mentioned these for the meetings that are left once you've taken out the ones that shouldn't be meetings. There are little practices one can do. We've heard some shared already, right? Be aggressive. Someone like doesn't give you clarity on what a meeting is, don't go. And if you at the top, model that behavior, the people 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 layers down will go, well, like they do that, so I get to do that. And then you can create a real like culture of accountability. Shortening windows, these tools all now like not just 60 minutes to 30, but like 30 to 25, or starting 5 minutes after. If you go to the next slide. You've brought these up, so I don't want to dwell on them, but the big one with like agendas and notes and all that, if everyone knows that not just that there's going to be like agendas in advance structured in certain ways, but that they live in very predictable places. I shouldn't have to struggle to figure out like, oh, I have to like get Sally to share the document because she wrote it and it's not like in the central folder, and there are tools that do this too. I should at any time be able to like go back to a meeting I know took place, find the agenda, find the notes, find maybe the video recording, like again, GitLab, every single meeting, they're fully distributed, but like gets recorded, the recordings go in very predictable places. And the more that you have those agendas and things available in advance, someone who either can't go or doesn't want to go can still chime in and say, I know what you're going to be talking about. I have a question about that. And just the psychological safety of knowing that your question will be discussed and that notes will come out of the back of that meeting with some comment on your question is a huge, like I don't have to be there. I don't have to be the strong voice in the room if I'm not comfortable with that for whatever reason. It is, again, a huge unlock. And then on the fatigue point, like the fewer things that we have that we think of as meetings, the more that we can prep with like a whiteboard, time together, add lunch, like prepare for the fewer times that we are together in real time, in person or virtually or both. So a lot to do, and then sort of leaving on roles. This again, not new, but I think there are some amazing practices with writing down the roles, who has what role in what meeting, so that people know well in advance. This is like one model, the DARE, sort of deciders, advisors, recommenders, and execution partners. I was telling you before, I know Twitter does this amazing thing. Friends of mine who are there, where they get in agendas, they have a slightly different acronym, but we'll write down the RACI and then they add next steps. So like 48 hours before the meeting, not only do you know what you're supposed to be talking about, but it's like, we're having this meeting so that this person who's the decider is going to take like the result, walk out of that meeting and into the like governor's executive something. So there's like, oh, I know exactly what we're doing, what we have to accomplish, because I can see the downstream actions. Putting it in paper is incredibly, incredibly powerful. So with that, I'll turn to Jenny to ask our final sort of question with 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. So the way I see like the logic of all of this is like, we are not going back to always being in the office again. Probably, like I was thinking about your question at the beginning of like, isn't the best way to just solve all of this that we have people in person? And I just think it's not gonna happen. Like, I think it's not really viable to have full return to office, which was the beginning of our slides. So if you don't, then you're stuck figuring out some way to make hybrid workable and trying to find time to do stuff that makes people feel included at their office and feel like they have purpose at their office. I feel like I'm like the purpose person, but like it's true that what you need to do that, unfortunately, I think is like more time, which is why we brought this thing in about the meetings, because with purpose, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but like you can kind of mess it up if it ends up feeling like another corporate initiative. Like I think the wrong way to do it is you get you go behind like a curtain for a month and you come up with like, this is the purpose of the state of South Dakota, and like everyone in South Dakota, this is why you're, and it feels kind of top down and like a little artificial, and people can see through it. And it's not a bad thing to do. Like you should articulate your purpose. I think states start from a better position than like a lot of organizations, because you're helping people, like it's a public service. But what actually makes people feel included and like they have purpose tends to be one-on-one interactions with people. So like a boss, well actually let me ask, so do you have an experience where you're like, okay, that thing made me feel like I was valued at work? If you want to share it, that would be awesome. Yeah.
I don't have a thing, but one of the things that I've done, which is a small thing, it's almost embarrassing, is I do anniversary letters.
Aww.
So every month, I just write a note on everyone. Well, not to share my secret, but everyone gets a form letter, and then I write a note to everyone. And it takes a long time. I actually have in my bag to do today. But the feedback that I get, in terms of quantity of feedback that I get from people who have said, unfortunately, I've worked at the state for 40 years, 25 years, 10 years. No one has ever acknowledged an anniversary. Like, that is so disappointing, because regardless of what agency you're in, there's purpose to the work we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that it has not been recognized for so many of my colleagues for so many years, it's one of those, it's a small thing, but it means a lot to the people who receive them. And it does take time to do the notes, but even for me, that just grounds me in the like, we've got to put our people first and spend time investing in each person, because I don't get to see them across the state. But yeah, I mean, just even a simple letter was, and we started it before COVID, but I've gotten more feedback during COVID from people when they received them at home.
That's great.
Anybody else have something that someone did that made them feel included, or?
Yeah, I want to put my boss on the spot over here, Secretary Churchill from Maryland. This is something we've been doing for a while since he came on board as our cabinet secretary. Every month we have a monthly all-staff meeting, 600 and some employees. And that's one of the things he makes sure every staff meeting we do a recognize people anniversary. And he also makes sure that birthdays, I don't know how he does it, but 600 and something employees, I'm sure he's got a great special assistant, him and Nelson, with Marcy and Keena. But every birthday, there's a card on your desk, and we get cards and notices. So I agree, those are the kinds of things that make people, I mean, I tell my staff, look, there is life beyond this building, and this is more, you're human beings, and people have, you know, families and everything. So that's one of the things we really try to do, is make people feel special and make sure they feel worthy. You know?
That's great. Yeah, and making time, that takes time.
Yeah, it takes like,
For
I think,
itself.
right, that's the like, oh, like you can't actually do it unless you personally, like as a manager, have time to be able to do the letters and the calling and the once in, like the town hall thing is helpful and good, but like the 5-minute phone call of like, hey, I know you're 3 levels down, I don't get to pass you in the stairwell anymore, so I'm just literally calling you to tell you that I value what you're doing. Like it goes a really long way, and you can't do it if you can't get water, like go for a walk or like.
And sort of knowing that like it's so freeing when everyone knows that like all the lights are green, whatever the system is, like everything's good. We choose to come together for some higher purpose time, and like I could like, put the phone down because I know I don't have to be checking my email, because like if something really hits the fan, that's gonna ring, because we've all agreed on that. And I, as the employee, if I get the call from the manager, know like, well, I know everything's fine. Like this isn't a check-in on how's that thing going, which like maybe you've sent 10 emails about, like it's fine. Be like, no, green light. We all know green light because everyone looks at the same green light all the time. You can like relax and have that conversation, which is so much more valuable.
The other thing that we talk about when we talk about this research is that like it actually gets harder to do this as you get further down in the organization. So I think that I've seen a lot of folks that I work with in states who can do it with their like immediate reports. So like a secretary will do it with their chief of staff and like the deputy, the deputy secretary or whatever, but like somehow trying to make sure that it gets cascaded down so that actually the manager of this department is doing it with their people is really important, because you're controlling like your part of this, but the people who quit are the ones on that right graph, right? Those are the ones who really need that, and like those people are managed by people that go a bit further down, and it's hard to do because you can't necessarily, there's ways like people put it in KPIs, people will put it in performance reviews, you can embed it, like trying to find these ways to get people in the organization who are managing further down to do that same letter writing thing.
Yeah. We're at 4 minutes, so I want to make sure we show our last question.
Oh, yeah.
Then we're done.
Yes, okay, so questions to reflect on, and would love to hear any thoughts that you have as we're closing this out, but how can you take this back to your organization in a natural and organic way? Like I was laughing to myself imagining that we just sent a bunch of like really important state officials home. We're going to cancel all the meetings on their calendar. Like, what were those people saying to them? So like, how can you actually take this back in a way that is natural and doesn't feel like an artificial sort of purpose initiative or like dramatic canceling of all meetings? And then again, like how do you find ways to make people who aren't here and thinking about this, because I think part of the benefit of conferences too is just like actually remembering that within the rat race of your job, like there's these moments where you can take a day and step back and be like, actually that is really important and I forget about it and I should recommit to doing that. How can you help other people who don't have this day and this time to think about that actually take this same lesson and cascade that through the org? And then how can you track the impact? Like one of the most powerful ways to build momentum for this stuff is being able to show that it works. Like I find it really compelling when Phil talks about GitLab, because like they're actually a really successful company and they're all remote, and I think that's like really powerful. So being able to say, we actually started tracking employee retention or whatever, and I started writing these letters and like, look what happened. Like it's worth investing a little bit of time for that story, because it might help with number 2 also.
And you can't control, for us, it's clients like who are demanding on our schedule that we can't always like push upstream. And for many agencies, it might be like the governor or someone else who's like, I can't control that person, but I can control my little team and I can share our stories. And if you start to say, hey, our well-being is better, we're working fewer hours, or the Pulse survey scores have gone up, they're like, what are you doing? Like, well, we're sort of making time for the moments that matter by really rolling up our sleeves and trying to work at the stuff that doesn't. So we give people the flexibility and some of their day and insanity back at a bathroom break. And it's you have to start small and test and learn and share stories very publicly of the little wins to get a very big boulder rolling down the hill. But ending right on time. This has been a fascinating conversation. We hope that it has been helpful, and like you see, it's like 2 gnarly topics of like not just taking out the meetings, but making time for the things that matter. Because if we don't address the things that matter, people will look for them somewhere else, which is really challenging as we come back from COVID. But thank you for having us, and hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.